Welcome to the Church of the Palms, and this is Watercolor Wednesday, and I'm Kathy Futrell. Today we're going to be painting a composition of palms using masking tape as a resist. But before we jump into the lesson for today, I have a couple of reviews to do with everybody, because when we talk about painting in watercolor, it's very important that we use good quality watercolor paper. The paper I use is called Kilimanjaro. It also, lots of the watercolor paper comes in pads like this, where you can work and tear. Once you work off a block, you can take a X-Acto knife, and there's special little tools that will take this like a palette knife. It'll remove the paper, but it's glued on all four sides except for a little slot right here. I like to work on a block because the paper is really tight, and if you want to go really wet, it's nice to have a block. I don't paint that wet most of the time, but I get these large sheets of paper, whether it's Arches, Kilimanjaro, Casing, any good quality watercolor paper should be at least 140 pounds, and I prefer what is called cold press, which has a little tooth or texture. Now, if I had that big sheet, I would show you. And the reason it's called 140 pounds is because if you had a sheet of paper that was 22 inches by 30, which is the whole size of a large sheet of watercolor paper, and this is only a quarter, it would, if you stack up a ream, which is 500 sheets, it would weigh 130 pounds. 90-pound paper is a little light. 300-pound paper is very heavy, and a lot of people do like using 300-pound paper. It also comes in hot press, which is very smooth, like it's been ironed. And rough means you forgot to take it out of the dryer. Okay, so there's cold press, which I prefer. Cold press means it was a natural, it's just got a good tooth. Now, I'm folding this paper because it's the way I tear it to get the decal edge. And it depends on the size paper I want to work on. But if I'm trying to get smaller sheets of paper, and then I do this. I will take my paper and tape it down to a piece of cardboard so it's not slipping and sliding. That's the advantage of using a block. Or if you have a notebook with your watercolor paper, that also works. Okay, the other thing I want to mention just very quickly is that brushes are very important too. And I have more brushes than I ever use, but I think that brushes matter. This is my favorite brush for large skies. It's called a sky flow brush. Now, I have some lovely, well, they're called Ibisay Kalinsky brushes, and they are pure sable, and they're very fine brushes. I don't often use them unless I am working very large. That we have what is called round and flats, obviously, a round and a flat. But I have been lately using what is called a pseudo sable, and this is my flat. And where is my round? Right here. So I have several of these lovely pseudo sables, which are like less than half the price of a sable brush. But I also use synthetic brushes, and they are very inexpensive but wonderful as long as you get a good point. Here's my flat and round there. So I use a number 2 pencil when I'm drawing. I don't think you want to use a hard because it messes up the paper. Just be sure you don't press down too hard when you're drawing. So let's get started with our lesson. Well, first thing before we paint, this is a exercise that I just came up with out of my head. So who knows, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But I'll explain. I did this morning, and it shows the tape here on the paper, and it shows where I started. But I'm going to be working from a fresh piece of paper to show you how to do this. But so here's my new paper, obviously, and I'm going to do a composition, and I'll explain my inspiration. So each of you here in the room, you have this piece of paper that I left over here, which is for the idea today, working either in black and white to start with, or preferably in color, a composition based on John Singer Sargent with a section of palm trees. So I'm gonna, before I talk about paint, and it is important to use good quality paint, the only thing I'm gonna draw today is the line for the ground, and a little indication just by using this image to look at. I'm just going to suggest, and I'm going to figure out the palm trees as I go along with the masking tape. Okay, so I'm going to have a lot of sky, and in order to save these trunks, I'm going to put down masking tape. Now, I don't really want perfectly straight lines. Let's see, what would happen if I do it like this? Does that work? Okay, that does work. All right, good. I'm taking pieces of masking tape, and I'm going to just tear them. And I'm going to make lots of little tears because I want these nice rough edges. So I'm going to use some of these skinny ones for palm branches, and so this would be too fat for a trunk. Matter of fact, doing this exercise this morning, I realized I don't want those trunks too fat. So this is how I start. I put down a little bit of tape, and I think about the ones in the background. See, that's a nice thin trunk. Okay, so that corresponds with a tree like this. Now, in a composition this size, if you want to look larger, work larger. This is one I started where I put in 7 trees. And I'm still working on this idea of maybe suggesting some of these lights that I want to keep. But on this composition, I'm going to do 5. So I'm using odd numbers. Maybe this one is going to be a little taller, larger trunk. So I'm going to add more pieces to this tree to go taller. And well, that looks a little wide right there. I don't want it that wide, so maybe I can just trim off a little bit. Oh, that would make a nice little palm. That would make a nice little palm frond right there. Okay. So the trunk, I don't want them to get too wide, and I can always add more. If I get this too thin, I can always add more. So that allowed me to kind of overlap this piece. But you see, the composition allows me to move these around, and just be sure when you're stationary, when you're through with it, you press it down real good. All right, so this tree is going to get a little taller, and because the trunks of these trees are actually thinner at the top, I can let that be a little thinner as it goes up. Okay, so this one's closer, this one's further back, and I'm just going to keep tearing tape to block out where my trunks are going to be, and then we can get started with the sky. So let's make another short one, and I'm going to vary the distance. So you see, you don't want them all the same. They'll look like a gate. You want them to be, gates are very irregular. You want this to be, as a matter of fact, I'm kind of leaving this open in the middle, and I will paint a few little tiny palm trees in there. Let's see, this looks like it's a nice size. I think I'm just going to go up with a trunk here, a little taller. Now this might be my bigger tree. And then I'm going to make a smaller one here and use, again, I kind of want my trunks to get smaller as they go up. Okay, so those are trunks of trees. And then I will do, I've decided that I don't need to do a whole lot with these fronds. Now, if you wish, you could use a pair of scissors and you could be more careful with the fronds, but I do know that what's going to happen is there'll be areas where I want some orange, okay, or some yellow. So maybe all I do is put a little piece of tape so that I don't lose all of my areas where I want the light to be. And I want this to run off over here. So I'm just going to do a few more little pieces, and let's get started with our paint. Okay, so I could use my Skyflow brush that I was just showing you, but I'm just going to, since I'm working small, I'm going to use that flat. And what I have in my palette are my warm colors and my cool colors. Now this morning, since I was painting, my paints are pretty juicy, but if you haven't started painting if you haven't painted in a while, you either need to put fresh paint out or you just simply add some water to all of your paint. And I'm going to begin with some blues. This is my cerulean blue, and I'm using American Journey paint, but there are a lot of good brands out there. The reason I am an ambassador for Cheap Joe's in Boone, North Carolina, so I use a lot of the products that come from Joe's, Cheap Joe's in Boone. But I want to tell you that there are lots, paint companies are doing such a good job with their paint that all of the good brands like Winsor Newton, what are some brands that y'all use? Winsor Newton, what brands? What?
Schmincke.
Oh, that's a Japanese. That is very good. Do you have, what is it?
Holbein.
Holbein.
Yes.
Out the top.
Yes.
That's
Daniel
great
Smith.
stuff. Daniel Smith. Excellent. I love Daniel Smith acrylics too. So they are all good companies. Now this is going to be my sky across the top, and typically I wet my paper first. Yes. But because I'm just going to go so quickly, and what I did this morning is I just mingled different blues. I would hit a little purple every now and then, and I started across the top of my watercolor paper, and I just got, I just had fun. And I just put in some nice color, lights, different blues, and then I started adding water and just let the paint flow down. Now I'm going to leave I'm going to leave that little spot of white. That was purely accidental, but the point is that that's going to be where my top of my tree, and I want this to be a little lighter right here as it moves toward the horizon. So these are going to be distant trees in the background, and I know that's a little funny shape, so I'll get rid of that. Okay, so now this has to begin to dry, so I'm going to do something just to help it dry a little bit. One thing I do to help it dry is I run it outside and give it a few minutes, but I'm going to go ahead and paint the bottom and get that finished while this is drying. I've got a funny little shape right there. Do I want to deal with that, or do I want to leave it? I think I just have to. It gets dangerous once it starts to dry. Sometimes you just have to leave it alone. And you know that the palm trees are going to be doing their thing here. Let me do a quick wash, and then I'm going to tell you that you have to let it dry. And while it's drying, I'm going to do a palm tree sketch and explain how a palm tree grows and talk to you about what kind of palm tree are you going to do. This happens to be a, Jim, what do we call that one? This palm tree is not a Washingtonian, but a coconut palm. It has the long fronds. But if you have, maybe it's the Washingtonian that has the short fronds. Well, anyway, just look at your tree and see how it's grown. Yes. Okay. And also, it comes from the top of the tree and it hangs down and it goes out. And sometimes it looks like a ball. So you can see how the artist, John Singer Sargent, has controlled that. And he's using some beautiful colors in here, not just green. As a matter of fact, he's used more purple and orange. So we're going to have a little fun interpreting that painting. Also keeping in mind that you got to know what kind of palm tree you're doing. So the background is going to be a more bright color. So I use an Aurelian yellow or a bumblebee yellow, which is a little stronger yellow. And I start by putting in some of these, and I can paint right over the point is we're painting right over our masking. And I'm going to kind of use those yellows where I see them. This is a green, it's a bright green, and it's a green that's called Skips green. And I'm going to put some green in here. It's not all orange or yellow. And then so this, in a way, is going to suggest this time of the year, fall. Although in Florida, we sure as heck don't get a whole lot of changing color. But we have a little, every now and then we can see that orange in there. All right, so my orange, which I can make with my red yellow, is throughout. I should do a little concentration here. and my sky's already drying, so it's going to help to remove the tape in a few minutes. And I'm going to come all the way across with this orange and let it kind of mingle in to this landscape. This is a burnt sienna that I added just now. And the orange is also a complement to blue, and yellow is a complement to purple. Well, and I have a little purple in there. All right, and then I'm going to go all the way across with a very pale light green and a little more toward the foreground, and then I'll put in some shadows for those trunks of the tree, which we have to keep in mind what is happening. Now, I'm a very tight painter. I sit there and draw and I paint every little thing, but I wanted this to be a little bit fun, and I always like to start loose because I know that I'm going to get tighter. So here I have developed this background, and I need to let a lot of that dry. And we'll put in that shadow before I stop for this just a little bit of time here. And this is just suggesting that each of the trees has a shadow. You know, one other thing I want to do. I know that the background, and I'm dulling this green with a little bit of the orange, I know that that background is going to be dark underneath. So let's just, while it's nice and wet, let's just establish a few darks in there. And I'm just going to use that dark green. Seems like there's a lot of dark here, and it kind of gives stability to this corner over here. And there's a spot or two in here. And just a variation. This is all that is. And I know I'm going to do a couple of little palm trees in there. Okay, so it's got some value. Now, this has got to set aside and dry a little bit. And then I'm going to go back to my composition that I like to talk about. And this will just be moved temporarily so that I can share with you a sketch. And I always like to talk about composition. We are doing a low horizon, so our design today is a horizontal. It's not a vertical. However, if I were doing just 2 palm trees, I would definitely do it in a vertical composition. I would maybe put one on the axis where the focal point is, and this would be where you have an intersection of when you divide something into 3 equal parts, you end up with a place that's called a focal point. So this becomes a focal point. This is. These are focal point. These are areas that are good to put your subject matter. It is never good to put your subject matter in a corner or in the middle. Okay? And that's why they have this rule of composition, because photographers do this all the time. They want, if they have something to focus on, they want that center of interest to be at one of those positions. The other thing that you have to keep in mind is the feeling of balance in a composition. And that's why we were talking about that if you have so many trees over here, you don't want to do exactly the same, but you want to have a sense that there is the balance is there. And then unity is the idea of repeating shapes and creating contrast of shapes. All right, so the palm tree I'm going to talk about and then I'm going to do is they're basically from our handout that we had. There are 2 trees here that are represented. This particular one is a very thin tree, and it does get slightly larger as it comes down to the ground, okay? And that from this point, there are fronds, but you'll notice that even though they want to shoot straight up out of here, they're still going to hang down, okay? And when they do, then you've got to also let gravity take its toll on the way the fronds are painted. So in the sketch, hi Brandy, you are also going to be doing your fronds in the position in which, and sometimes they are double, you know, they hang down from the backside too. So this becomes that the palm that I call a coconut palm, whether it really is or not. Now this other kind of palm is going to be one that is more of a, it also gets a little larger at the bottom. and its fronds
Your
tend.
hand's in the way.
Oh yeah, my hand. Oh, let's see. It's hard to see me draw when my hand is right there, isn't it? Okay, so it does the same thing, but instead of going like this, the fronds of this kind of tree, it has more of a palmetta. In other words, it comes off in a frond, and then it has these shapes. Okay, so what happens with this kind of a palm is that you might have a tendency of having more of a circle composition. Okay, and when you're seeing all these fronds on top of each other, you know, they do look like one big ball. Okay, so this is where I think I'm going with my palm tree today. Although I wasn't really sure when I started which palm I was going to make. So let's go back to our original and let's see if it's dry enough to remove the tape. Now, I came up with a couple of things this morning. This is still slightly wet, but I'm just going to carefully remove the tape. And where I have placed the tape, we can see that it has retained the white. Now, sometimes it will bleed underneath the tape, and it doesn't always perform as it's supposed to. And this looks more like a windmill than a palm tree right now, but it has retained a little bit of where I want to have some color other than blue, okay? This one is a thinner, smaller tree, and it appears to go back in the background. So anything closer to you in the foreground. Now remember, we just stuck this shape on so that we would keep some light in place. And here we go, another background palm. And if your paint is still a little wet, just be very careful or give it another minute or two, you know. Walk around the room and visit. And now, did I miss a spot here? No, I think it's just a lot of paint on the tape. There we go. And so, that was a nice little shape, and so was that one. These are a little clunky for our palmettos. Now I'm going to paint a couple of the trees, and then we're going to all get started. I do believe. So my thought is that one of the things I did decide to do this morning when I was doing my own interpretation is that I realized if I soften this shape up by just adding a little water and softening the hard edge that I had here where the palm was going to go, just a little bit of lifting and softening. Oh, I forgot one of my palms. Here's some more tape to take off. Okay, now I'm not going to paint all of them. I'm going to paint one tree and let you get started. I do believe that you'll catch on. And the other thing is that I do want to say that in the background, you'll want to add some detail to the background as well. So this still looks a bit wet, but it's good enough to go up here. All right, my first indication is to add some yellow and orange. And remember that we want to just give it a sense of color. I think I'll just work with these two. And that way, when we begin to suggest these palms, and I'm going to move back and forth because this is nice and wet still. This one's going to run off. This one's going to go out of the design. So I'm just suggesting, and I'm going to use my purple. Oh my gosh, you have to be careful with purple. I always like to put a little blue in my purple so it's not so crazy. And that's because these fronds that are hanging down are in shadow. And I want to do this a little wet because it's kind of running into what's going on. Okay, remember these are going to go. So I'll get some green in there in a minute. Now, where is the light coming? The light is coming down. It's pretty much an overhead light, the best I can tell. It is good if you want to give the shadow to one side of your tree, however, to say that the light is more here. The light might be, in this case, it just feels like it's straight down because of the way the shadows are on the ground and on the, but there's definitely light hitting all these, and that's why they're so nice and bright. Okay, so down the trunk of this tree, it gets a little bit bluer as the trunk has some shadow coming from the branches or from, and this one doesn't need to be quite that dark. So always have a paper towel handy to take up what you want to. And on the trunks, I want to have, but you know, I'm going to tell you that I feel like I need to draw first. And I didn't draw anything. I just made a line. This feels like it's too thick right here. And there won't be much I can do about that unless I trim in some landscape behind it. But there's that tree. I almost wish I'd made this one a little skinnier. This is why I like to do it before you do it. I can say, don't make your trunk so wide. Don't do what I did. Let's fix that. Like this is really too wide here. Now, I'm going to apply some lavender, kind of, it just looks like it would be nice to also put a little warmth in this trunk, let it run together. And so I don't really have a white trunk, but I do have a sense of still being light with a bit of, natural color. So these do have a touch of orange in the trunk. They're brown. Everybody will say, oh, no, wait, those trunks, I've seen those palm trees, they're brown. Well, wait, I don't know that that's true. I see them looking gray sometimes. We're just going to give them some texture and a little shadow and a little touch of color. Now, I want to do some more here and some more here before we begin. And I want to also say that detail is going to be, I really want to show you, if I didn't like the width of a trunk, what I would do, I would bring in some color into that background and thin up the trunk just a little bit. And of course you can do that, but you can't go all the way up into the sky very well. So just try not to make it look like you've outlined it, and that would not work at all. But I wanted to say that there's, okay. I want to give a sense of the foliage of some trees in the background, and I want to soften up a few things. Matter of fact, if right here I want this to look like it's receiving some light, I just took some water and lift a little lightness out of that, and that helps it to say I'm a shape. I don't know what that spot is right there, but I can sort of get rid of that. Okay. And then I can sometimes just adding water and softening up any paint strokes that you make. And then if I want to show maybe a little palm tree that sticks up here, I can do that with my little round brush again. So all the sizes of brushes that you use, whether it's wide or flat, flat goes good for big strokes, and the round goes best for detail. And I just wanted this to have a sense of another little palm tree down in here. I want to put some greens in here as well. And sometimes all you need to do is just suggest the palm tree. I tended to overwork my palm trees here this morning. I kept putting paint on and putting paint on. And I just know that you can let it dry and come back with another color and just suggest those palms, those fronds. And they are already, that's too wet, so let me take that up. They are going to have some dark color kind of hanging out at the bottom. And I'd like the blue in with the purple. And I want to do some dark greens too. Oh, that's much nicer. Okay. Now let's get some dark green, because it'll start saying I'm a palm tree. And a little bit of light. a little bit of light. Now, this is an exercise that we could do over and over and over, because the more you do it, the better you get at suggesting these palm trees and the fronds. And I want it light at the top. I want to maybe put a little more orange. It's hard to stop, I'm sorry. There. Okay, I'm getting very bright. Okay, and then the trunk of the tree that might be here or might be coming through here. All of these little background touches can happen, okay, to start making your landscape in the background work. Now remember, I'd have to finish these trees as well, and then do a little more detail in the foreground, as well as crisp up some of these shadows that are here. It'll help to make that appear more lifelike in the foreground. A little touch of texture, just suggesting the grass, and your painting will hopefully start to come to life. So, are we ready to paint now? But remember that taking the tape means that you do some tears. You can go in both directions. So I just make a bunch of tears and then see which one starts to work for trunks and which one starts to work for some fronds. Okay? So good luck painting, and good to see everybody.